friends, welcome to episode 232 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can, whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I am Sarah.
I'm Rob.
Meow, 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 meow.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. Meowdy-doo.
Meowdy-doo, everybody.
Sarah's in a very cat mode today, I think, because my cats were being all wonderful and close, and you ended up playing with them for a while, and then now you've got cats in the brain.
It has been gloomy and cold for the last 3-4 days, something like that. I am beginning to feel the sads, and I am trying to make the serotonin happen.
That's 100%.
Everything today has been tough.
Yep. Nope. I get it. I totally get it. I mean,
so.
Yeah, and I'll say it on this cast. I put it on the Discord as well. For those of you who are not on our Discord, who are out there in listening land, we truly appreciate you listening. But if you could do us a minor favor, and it's going to sound like the typical YouTube, give us a like and subscribe. Like seriously, for whatever app or methodology that you're using to listen to us, give us a rating. If you can, give us a nice comment. Because it makes a huge difference. We are falling off the algorithm every time. Like when I run a search for our specific name in Spotify, 5 others come up before our actual icon.
Oh my god, really?
That have nothing to do with in their names or anything with Storyteller or Conclave.
Oh wow.
But it's like them, and then us.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, that's because we're kind of falling off. We only have ever charted in the U.S. top, I think, 250. We came into the numbers once.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot of episodes. So if you're out there and you're listening, whatever country you're in, we appreciate it. We truly, truly do. But it is hard for us to know that you're out there and for us to get any level of recognition and get other people to listen. So we'd really appreciate a like, a rating, a comment on one of the shows. All of that helps us get recognized and gets us more listeners and more people joining the Discord. We keep getting them on the regular, and I love it. I absolutely love the discussions that happen in our Discord. We get people from all kinds of areas talking about all kinds of games, and it's wonderful. I love the community. I love everybody talking. And it means a lot. And every once in a while I'll get DMs from people who don't want to talk in the community because they're shy. That's okay. We still appreciate it. We love the ideas.
Yeah, right on.
So thank you all. Thank you all for all that you do.
Absolutely.
To keep us going on this. So.
Oh, it's your gaming news. I got my game coming up this weekend.
You do. And you have the fateful problem
of
one of your players is sick.
One of my players is sick.
And sick in a way that they cannot show up to the session.
Yeah, it's a little COVID, Rona,
Yep, came back from a vacation, sick.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the worst, really, because you're like, oh, great, I had this wonderful vacation, and I'm now sick.
And the really crappy part, I talked to him today, and he still has to work, because he's self-employed, and he's like, you don't get sick time for being self-employed.
Luckily, he can do his work remote which is nice. That is really nice. But man, just the whole, I do some work, and then, God, can I take a nap? I need to take a nap. I'm just going to pass out.
One of those rare moments I got to quote Count Rugen to him, I said, you're still working? That's got to be the saddest thing that I've ever heard.
Yep.
Well, get some rest. If you haven't got your health, you haven't got anything.
And I made the point to tell you, it's like, people look at that and recognize Count Rugen and the king as, or the prince, I should say, as evil, vile people. And they are, don't get me wrong. But it also still shows that, they're friends.
Yeah.
They have a relationship. It's not like they're at each other's throat and thinking of devious ways to stab each other. No, they're hanging out.
Yeah.
This is a normal thing. They're like, he's concerned about his friend, Yes, at one point in his existence, he did run a sword maker through with a sword that it was made for him specifically.
He does have a secret torture dungeon.
He does. He does have a secret torture dungeon. That is also true.
Right.
But at the same time, it doesn't mean he doesn't care about his friend.
Just because he's bad the guy doesn't mean he's bad the guy.
Correct. I mean, it does in this case, but at the same time, he's still thinking of his friend. And I think that's wonderful. And I think you should do that with your villains, too. That, that maybe he's caring about his henchmen. Maybe those henchmen do want to give him that special birthday present, because he likes a sweater. it'll keep him warm at night.
Yeah, exactly.
So think about that. Just a little side thing, though. But all right, we do have a system spotlight to do.
Yeah.
This one is interesting because you were so excited when we actually, I want to say, when we started doing this podcast, you had told me about Dresden Files as a story.
Yeah,
And
I've been going through my second read through of the books.
Yeah, exactly. And there's 17?
I want to say we're up to 17 now.
I think it's 17.
Because what was the bank heist one? Had the Denarians in it, and every book that has the Denarians in it is a multiple of 5. They show up in 5, 10, and then 15 again.
Yeah.
And then there were 2 books after that, so it's got to be 17 now.
Yeah. And because when I looked at the wiki, there was a book that was listed, but like no dates.
Yeah.
And I was like, is there 18 or 17? Like, I don't know. So, I'm not surprised. Mm-hmm. But you were very adamant about talking to me about the thing, and over time you've discussed the universe when we've discussed urban fantasy.
Yeah,
and how it's different, and yet it fits still within the lexicon of what we understand as urban fantasy.
Yeah, it's just I think it's a great skin game. Thank you, Heatsink. The was the 15th book in the series. There. Mm-hmm. But anyways, yeah, so it's a lot of really great urban fantasy. But like. So if you're a fan of World of Darkness, if you're a fan of Urban Shadows, then Dresden Files fits right in that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. It's a book series about Harry Dresden, who's the only wizard that is listed in the Chicago Yellow Pages, and it starts off as some really simple detective stories, and after a couple books goes severely off the rails, mm-hmm. And you've got a war with vampires and the fairies getting involved, and werewolves. The second game is called Full Moon. Mm-hmm. It's all about werewolves in this setting and whatnot. And there's a little bit of everything for everyone. Mm-hmm. Harry is a flawed individual. Mm-hmm. I've heard that criticism a lot of, like, Harry is a very unlikable. He's a misogynist sort of, chauvinist sort of character.
Oh yeah.
Like, okay, that's fine. You don't need to like the protagonist,
right? Right.
But they are fun and interesting stories. And I've really come to just absolutely adore the world. Mm-hmm. So when I learned that Evil Hat Games mm-hmm. had created a game of it, mm-hmm. I was all in.
Yeah, so Jim Butcher, the author, who authored the Dresden Files, is actually friends with people at Evil Hat Games.
Yeah.
And they've been friends for quite a while, and when his agent basically said, okay, we've had enough of these requests for you to create an RPG or do something tabletop related out of this, mm-hmm. Can we work on that? And so he got a hold of Evil Hat, and in 2004 they worked out a license. And between basically 2005 and 2010, there were variants of the game. There was an original kind of mechanic system that didn't work out, and they had to scrap and redo. But they were running it at Origins as a playtest nearly every year right up through 2010 in various forms until they came up with their final thing, which was using Fate 3rd Edition. So in 2010, they released the 2 original books, which was Your Story and Our World, the rules information, and then the setting information. And when it released, it got 10 awards within the effectively a year. It had won 10 awards with that. And it was written as an in-canon book.
Yeah, it was really cool. We should have those. Sean picked those up mm-hmm. A while back, and that was actually my first exposure to Dresden RPG. Mm-hmm. And I think that was actually before I read most of the books too. I think I'd only read the first couple of books before I saw those original mm-hmm. Fate RPG books. Mm-hmm. And they were really fun actually, mm-hmm. Because they like you said, they were written kind of as an in-world document. Yeah. And so there are little Post-it notes put up in there and little mm-hmm. notes written in the margins mm-hmm. between Harry and his knowledge spirit named Bob. Mm-hmm. That just commenting on little things here and there and making tie-ins to the books and whatnot. Really cool.
Yeah, and it gave a little deeper dive into another character, Billy Borden, who was kind of penning it.
Yes.
And what was going on with the werewolves.
Yes,
more directly.
Billy comes in book 2. He runs he's the alpha of a pack of werewolves called the Alphas, and he actually he becomes friends with Dresden, and canonically throughout the series they have a D&D game that they run,
which is funny as all get out.
Yeah, it's great.
So then after that happens, we had Fate Core was released in 2013. That was a successful Kickstarter, and there were some extensions that came from that came into the 2014 Fate Accelerated system. And that was so successful that then they were like, okay, we can do accelerated versions of things like Dresden, which was before we even got Fate Core out. So let's condense. Let's see what we can do here. And that's how we ended up with this Dresden Fate Accelerated, which was just a simplified standalone single book release.
Yeah.
Instead of this multi-book with the 3rd edition rules, which I'm not going to say are bulky, but there's a different level of crunch.
Yeah, it definitely went a little more in depth. I would say the mechanics are mostly the same, but there was definitely more, you had 5 aspects instead of just 3 to start with and stuff like that. You had multiple skills because it was under the actual core Fate rules and whatnot.
And being able to separate the core book of Dresden, basically mechanics, and the setting and world book makes for a lot more reading material. Plus, the physical size of the book of those books are larger.
Well, it was a full size format, 8.5 by 11 book.
Yeah, I think the original was closer to 500 pages, and this is like 250 in a mini book.
Yeah.
Which we see way more often now. This mini style.
Worth noting, though, you really only needed the first book to play the game.
Right.
The second one was a lot of world building, so it was very valuable. But it was it was like having the monster manual for D&D.
Right? No, without a doubt.
Super helpful, but not necessary.
But again, packing that monster manual now into this little book.
Oh yeah. On
top of a compressed version of Fate, and still getting all the world, it's a lot to pack into a tiny book.
There is a lot in this book. Yeah.
There is. So the first 80-ish pages of this book are just people and places and the rules that govern the society and the traditions of the world setting.
And a lot of who's who. A lot of who's
very
who.
Quick
various
who's
factions.
Who.
Yeah. And man, I don't know that we ever found a for sure point at which this book is canonically supposed to take place.
Actually,
does it?
It does say, and it's in the foreword.
Oh, is it?
I'll see if I can grab it real quick. Because they talk about they don't want you to without reading too far in.
Because the Fomor are listed as antagonists, so that puts it at least around book 13. They make reference to one of Dresden's occupations, let's call it, without getting into too many spoilers. So it's got to be post book 13, because I think White Knight, Cold
Dresden Files through Skin Game.
Skin Game. Okay, so
that's
book
where
15.
That's where through Skin Game. So if you haven't read Skin Game at the point where you got this, which was apparently it had just come out.
Yeah.
They were like, "Hey, there's spoilers if you find them," kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It does set it in the foreword where this technically sits within the amount of information. But it's not really within the timeline there.
Yeah.
Because the book could be played whenever up to that point.
Right. There are factions that during the course of those 15 books no longer are a factor through various means, and they are still fully detailed in there. So you can really play this in the Dresden verse whenever.
Well, and the other thing that I found interesting about within those first 80-ish pages is it doesn't really communicate the timeline or any events other than basically where the Dresden world opens.
Yeah.
And is its comfortable opening point. So I don't by reading this, I don't know anything that's happened in any of the books. There are no events that are obvious that talk about a specific moment in time that Harry did that would expose anything to me, a non-reader of this novels. Like, I didn't catch anything in there.
Yeah, no, I'll give that to you.
But for you, reading about the undead T-Rex,
I was like, oh yeah, Deadbeat, good book.
But not only that, not only did you remember that, but you also remembered what led up to its creation.
Yes, I do. Yes,
and
I do.
how those are. But that's not listed anywhere in here,
mm-hmm.
which I think is a nice ode to it, but also some concern in there for someone like myself trying to look into this.
Yeah.
So I will say this. So within the Dresden Files, let me just kind of paint out a little bit of the difference, because I know there's going to be some questions about the difference between the two books a little bit. And we kind of expressed that by saying, that the original books were almost 500 pages in a much larger physical book. And trying to fit that into the Accelerated did change things. Well, the key to that is that it also altered, because we went from 3rd edition Fate to effectively Core, which was 4th edition on. So in that there were physical changes that happened within the Fate architecture that also played into this. And then a lot of the people who did reviews on this also said that, and this is because I didn't have any detailed time to go through the original one, to say one way or another that it's in there or not. But effectively, if you want heavy mechanics tied tightly to the design of the Dresden verse, the original 3rd edition set is the way to go. It is very, very tied into the world. But if you want something that is more urban fantasy, that you can feel the Dresden verse in, that's quick to get into without hacking out the original rule set and has enough crunch, this is the way to go. You can definitely get started. I think one commentary stated that this one you could get from opening the game and character creation in under an hour. Whereas the original was like, your character creation would feel chunky and take you time because of the detail you'd go into. The use of mantles made a huge cut down in that time.
Yes, I agree.
So not to say that the original cores, that this is like this isn't so much a 2nd edition. Don't think of it that way, where you're getting an altered rule set that is inclusive. It is different in the way that the mechanics function. It is different in the way that it touches the world, almost to the point I would say that it is not that they aren't compatible, but it's like going from 3.5 to 5th edition in D&D.
Yeah.
It is enough of a drastic jump that you're going to really have to recalculate how you're doing things. You're not going to take character sheet and move forward.
Yes. Yes, agreed. Agreed. All right, so let's do just a little breakdown on the world here. We talked a little bit about how it's urban fantasy at the core, okay, and clearly there's a man named Harry Dresden.
Yep, that is.
And so Harry is a wizard who lives in Chicago.
He's a wizard, Harry?
He's a wizard, Harry. Yes. God, I saw this video the other day. I guess apparently they got J.K. Rowling was like awarded, so like Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone or something like that was awarded like one of the best opening lines in a book.
Okay.
Ever.
Sure.
And someone made a video and they were like, that is BS. It's not even the best line of a book starring a wizard named Harry.
That is also true.
And I think it was Blood Rights opens with the line, "The room was on fire and it wasn't my fault."
I think that is... I know that line, and I've never read the series.
Yeah, I know.
The impact of that.
But anyways, I digress.
Yeah. No, there are some amazing openings to books.
So he's a wizard named Harry. And kind of down on his luck. He's basically a private investigator when he first starts off in the books. Kind of kept on retainer by the Chicago PD.
Okay.
As a supernatural consultant whenever crimes happen that they can't quite explain. He's got a ally in the force by the name of Karen Murphy, who also is kind of that Fox Mulder style cop that like she knows there's something going on and knows Harry knows more than he lets on about.
That is a very old reference, so
but she kind of gets like sidelined of like, oh, you're that weird cop that gets the weird assignments.
Go talk to your weird dude.
Yeah, you'll never be promoted around here because you believe in weird conspiracy theories and magic and stuff.
And she's like, yeah, because it's real, and they're like, yeah,
sure it is, Karen.
Yeah, my son had a magician at his birthday too.
Exactly.
At Halloween we see ghosts all the time.
So it starts off with that, and we get to know a little bit about that. We get to know a little bit about there are fairies involved. There is a place, there's a realm called the Never Never, which is one step aside from our reality where all these supernatural beings hail from. It's generally where most of the fairies live and stuff like that. You have the summer court and the winter court of fairies, otherwise known as the Seelie and the Unseelie. But there's a bunch of wild fae that aren't really associated with any of those groups. There are whole story arcs that involve them, and they get very, very, very deeply involved in the story. In fact, most of the supernatural world is governed by a set of rules penned by Queen Mab.
The Accords, if I remember correctly?
The Unseelie Accords, yes. Written by Queen Mab of the Winter Court. You may know her from great things like A Midsummer Night's Dream. That Mab.
Yep.
And
Stories of King Arthur.
Yeah.
It's there.
Eventually we get things involved like the Knights of the Cross. Thusly called because they wield swords that have that are forged with nails from the crucifixion into their blades. And they are sworn to fight a group of demons that are bound to the 20 pieces of silver used to betray Jesus, called the Denarians. And that's a whole thing. So there's a lot going on in this world.
There's a lot of lore.
But and this is one of the reasons why Urban Shadows grabbed me real quick, because Urban Shadows was a very light urban fantasy setting, but it involved wizards. You could play demon-possessed people.
Ghosts.
You could play fae, ghosts, werewolves. Obviously, like I said, there's werewolves involved in the whole second book there. That's where Billy Borden comes in. So there's a lot going on in this world. A lot of different factions. 3 different factions of vampires, multiple different types of werewolves. It's never just one. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're all people.
Yeah.
They all have an existence beyond what we know through media as vampires are, blood-sucking fiends, or werewolves, when they turn are just monsters, or demons are always pacting and no, these are individuals. They may not be humans, but they all have goals, friends, communities, and more so because of the Accords, they sit within this veil.
Yeah.
That they protect themselves from, even.
Yes.
And I remember saying that the Accords were put in place because basically the internet and media sped up too much. There's security cameras, webcams. People have cameras on their phones. Like, we could get caught, and suddenly humanity going from the, yeah, that's a thing, to the, the military is now going to assault places because they recognize there's something there that's a danger to humanity.
Yeah, it's the Unseelie Accords weren't around until technology started catching up, and then it basically Queen Mab penned out these accords and was basically like, all right, look, we are all going to agree to these things. We are going to have a way of how we interact with each other. We're going to have a thing that accords us neutral territory if we need to meet or anything like that, where no violence can take place. We are going to have ways of paying off debts if we have wronged each other, so we don't go to open warfare. And if any of these rules get broken, the penalty is essentially death. And if you don't take care of it, it's not you who gets the death penalty. It's whoever is in charge of you. So clean your own damn house.
Yeah, and I love that concept.
And they do aggressively.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that there's Heatsink says Fae NATO.
Yeah.
And that's correct. It's kind of a non-aggression pact between everybody. But if there is aggression, it dictates how that aggression needs to happen.
Right.
It's kind of like the Geneva Convention,
Yeah.
for supernatural creatures. And that's not to say that there's not some, BS that goes on where, they'll work the system so that it either entraps people behind, like, oh, we forced you to break one of the rules, and that's not our fault. We didn't break the rule. You broke the rule. Doesn't matter how it happened.
Right.
That might be the plot of book 3. But,
but in all honesty, we see that at other places. It's just much more obvious in the way the design of this came out, which I still think is beautiful and simplistic. And one of the things that the Accelerated book does is it talks about the Accords, and it gives them like a couple paragraphs of kind of the general feeling, but doesn't hamper you within story style to say, these are the Accords. Here is the scroll, the 30-page scroll that, lists out all details in the text and the framework.
But they list the major rules, and they list why those rules are in place and how they're enforced, essentially.
Yeah.
And what they're designed to be to do to govern society, and it's really nice, actually. It's really good world building that works on many levels, and every single faction has the potential for characterization that is very rich and multifaceted and stuff like that, and that's what I really like. You don't ever end up with, all fairies are evil.
Yeah.
It's never that simple, And even within factions, you end up with good ones and bad ones and stuff like that.
Very much so.
So,
mechanics-wise, we've kind of gone over this.
Yeah, we actually talked not about Fate Accelerated, but we did talk about Fate Core. And that was believe it or not, episode 58.
Yeah.
And it feels weird to say that 2020 was a long time ago.
Well, not only that, that's 3rd edition Fate that we went over, or 4th edition Fate that we went over, which wasn't the Accelerated rules, but it was a while ago.
Yeah. So, but I would say about 80% of Fate Core is the same as Fate Accelerated. So, if you're looking for a breakdown of the mechanics and stuff like that, we're not going to devote a lot of time to rehashing them here. But most of the mechanics and how they handle things like aspects, how they handle the dice rolls and whatnot, all of that is covered in episode 58, our system spotlight on Fate Core, and that was released on June 10th of 2020.
Yep.
So
still out there.
If you want to go back and listen to that one, you'll get all the mechanics there.
Yeah. I will also say that there are 2 direct playthroughs that are very good. That will give you the developers' take on it. One is all of the developers at Evil Hat playing with the Fate Accelerated edition.
I need to go in and watch that. I did not have time. I've been very, very
Neither
busy
did
this
I,
week.
but I was able to catch it and recognize what they were doing. And I was like, okay, so we have something from the developers, which is always a great way to look at it. The other is there was a few of the sessions that came out of from the Kickstarter where they weren't playtesting anymore; they were live playing it, and that ended up giving us gives you a much stronger feeling of how others viewed it, and how the new pieces work really well together. So I think those 2 are good tie together for it. The one thing that both of them don't really get into is something that I'll get into later, which is how the game develops prior to even rolling the first dice.
Yeah.
So, but I'll get to that. So, but what are the differences as you recognize them?
Right. So I think the 2 main differences between Fate Core and Fate Accelerated is we now use approaches and we now use mantles. So approaches kind of overtake what the skill system used to be. It used to be that you have various skills, and they would have a rating of +1 to +6. I think they would go up to, and that'd be your typical stuff. Your shooting, your fighting, your negotiation, all that sort of things. What we have now is approaches, which are kind of like attributes, I suppose. They are flair, focus, force, guile, haste, and intellect. And these kind of govern different ways of going about doing a thing rather than what it is specifically that you're doing. So in a way, this is a lot like Legends of the Five Rings, where you've got your different rings, Earth, Air, Water, Fire, and Void. And it doesn't matter if you're attacking a foe, like, that doesn't always use fire. It might, if you're trying to be very forceful and direct about it, but if you're trying to attack your foe, by dodging and using guile and trying to trick them into overextending before you strike them, that's air. And it's the same thing here in Dresden Accelerated. It doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're trying to be tricksome about it, you're going to roll with guile. If you're trying to, leverage your intellect about it, well, guess what? That's intellect. If you're hitting something straight on, it's a force roll.
Right. It's almost approaching some of the Powered by the Apocalypse design, in that it's how you approach the situation. And I always find that interesting when we're looking at mechanics and where they birth from.
Yeah.
So
it's neat seeing so many games too, moving towards this approach system too, because this is becoming more and more common.
Yeah,
as we do
very
these
much
spotlights.
so.
And I kind of actually really like it. It allows a lot more freedom in making characters more multifaceted, I think, because you're not so bound by like your skills into creating a sort of pseudo class for yourself of like, oh, well, I'm the character that took the fighting skill, so now I'm the fighter.
Yeah.
Even though it's classless.
Yeah.
Well, now it's like, okay, well, I'm the fighter because I have a lot of force and I have a lot of flair and I have a lot of haste.
Right.
But this can also make me a mechanic, or this could also make, a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And the second thing that we have here is called mantles. And mantles are kind of like your character class, but they're more akin to what place you have in the supernatural world.
Right.
So many of the mantles, especially at the beginning of the list, are mortals. They're just like clued in mortal is the first one in there. And it's just a mortal who happens to know that the supernatural exists.
They've seen behind the veil.
Yeah. You'll have like low-level practitioners of magic. You'll have there's one that basically Karen Murphy has, which is the cop that's involved in this sort of stuff. Reporters and whatnot. And then of course you start getting into your different mantles of things like your various vampire courts. And even ancillary characters such as, like, the Red Court Infected.
Yeah.
So
I was reading about that a little bit.
The Red Court are the blood-drinking vampires.
Right.
And I need to specify that because there's 3 different types of vampires. One of them eats flesh, one of them drinks blood, and one of them feeds off of emotion. Okay. So the Red Court are the ones that drink the blood. And how they make new vampires is they infect others by biting them. And once you've been bitten by a Red Court vampire, the moment you make your first kill, basically it gives you the bloodlust, like you want to feed on people, but you're still technically mortal. Once you make your first kill, that's what converts you into a full Red Court vampire.
Gotcha.
That's what unleashes the beast, basically. So there are, like, ancillary mantles in there of, like, Red Court Infected, where you're halfway between mortal and Red Court Vampire, But that's a thing. So they put it in there, and it gives you a certain set of stunts, which are basically your, like, skills, edges, feats, sort of thing, that are specific to that mantle. I'll be straight up with you. Mantles remind me a lot of playbooks from Powered by the Apocalypse.
Yes. When I was reading through them, that's the first thing I thought of, is this feels like a playbook. You could have, in many ways with this game, you could make a play card that was just mantles that you can hand to people that they then fill in the blanks.
Yeah. Yeah,
Simple
easily.
as that. Yeah.
Easily.
Yeah.
Or, a lot like other, like, I believe it's templates in GURPS, if Sean could back me up on this one, or where they're pre-spent point sets that you then just basically say, I want this template, and you get everything on that list of things for your character.
Yep.
So even though it's a free-form game, you just pick the template, and it's got it's the shopping list, the full shopping list.
Yeah, so you have your approaches, and then you have your stunts, which are your moves.
Yeah, stunts are basically like moves from any Powered by the Apocalypse game. They're the special thing that you get. So character creation is actually pretty simple then, with this accelerated system. So first thing you do is you choose your mantle. What type of character do you want to play? What flavor of werewolf are you going to be today? Okay? So you choose your mantle. That's kind of where you're going to stop with your mantle. Like, you're just going to put the name of it on there for right now. You're not going to get to choosing anything off of it necessarily. But But what you're going to do then is you're going to pick a high concept, a trouble, and one other aspect. Okay. Now, these 3 things are aspects. I know, like I said, we're not going to just get huge into the mechanics because we did do a full breakdown of Fate earlier. But what an aspect basically is a word. It's a short phrase that describes your character. Okay, and how an aspect essentially functions in gameplay is if that phrase, if that descriptor of you is coming into play, you can invoke that aspect to get a +2 to your roll.
Yep.
Okay. So, for instance, I might be, the youngest wizard on the White Council. Okay, now, this could be a good thing for me because it means I am a White Council wizard. Awesome. If me being a White Council wizard is going to be an advantage in a situation, I can be like, hey, I'm the youngest wizard on the White Council. +2. Boom.
Yeah.
Okay. However, they encourage you to word your aspects as double-edged swords. In a very neutral way because I'm the youngest on the White Council.
Yep.
So that probably means that people aren't going to respect me because of my age and experience.
Yep.
Or lack thereof.
Yep.
So this aspect can then be compelled, which is kind of the negative way to apply an aspect, where someone's like, okay, well, I'm gonna try to convince this guy, okay, but you are the youngest wizard on the White Council, so they're gonna dismiss you.
Right.
That's a bad thing now. So you come up with a high concept, which is something that describes your character. A trouble doesn't have to be related to your high concept. But this is something that will continuously is a foible of your character. Okay. Think of this as something like adding hindrances in Savage Worlds.
Yeah. Loose with money.
Loose with money. Yeah, does. That doesn't matter if you're a werewolf or not.
Yep.
But loose with money. Okay, so you're going to be a broke werewolf most of the time.
Yeah.
And then one other aspect because you're a rounded person.
Yep.
And that can be anything.
Yep.
You'll then assign numbers to your approaches. So there are 6 approaches, so you're going to give one of them a +3, 2 of them a +2, 2 of them a +1, and one of them is going to be at 0. You can distribute those any way you want. The book does a very good job of describing these in, like, if you want to be a brute, put your 3 here, your 2s here, your 1s here, and your this. If you want to be an athlete, put these here. If you want to be an intellectual person, put them here.
Right.
As good examples of how to build characters.
Yep.
The next step is set your refresh to 3. I was like, okay, what does literally any of that mean?
That is kind of a new feeling.
All right, so you start the game with 3 refresh. Refresh is an interesting stat. It acts as kind of both an experience point system as well as a upper limit on the fate points that you can have.
Which is your fate points are the
metacurrency.
The metacurrency of being able to do other things.
Exactly. They're how you're going to invoke aspects and things like that. Think of them a lot like... They function in a lot of ways like bennies from Savage Worlds.
Yeah, your token of the game, if you will.
Yes, exactly. And it is a metacurrency. It is not something your character is aware of.
Right.
But the goal is during gameplay, you're going to have things compelled about your character, which will make bad things happen. But you will receive fate tokens in response to that, and then you'll use your fate tokens back to make good things happen for you, which makes the game have a dramatic swing to it. Refresh is a stat that sets the upper limit of how many fate points you start the game with. Okay. You keep the fate points from previous game. So if you've got more than your refresh, you'll keep those. But if you're lower than your refresh, you always refresh up to your refresh stat.
That's hilarious. You refresh your refresh.
But you can also spend your refresh to, like, buy stunts as character advancement. So do you want a character that has cool tricks that they can do, or do you want the versatility of having a stack of fate tokens in front of you?
Yep. Oh, always a neat way to look at it.
Exactly. So it's useful. Refresh is useful either way, and I really like that aspect about it. So for right now, you're just going to start with your 3 refresh. You're going to choose a stunt. Okay. Your mantle will give you a number of starting stunts, and then you get to choose one more off of the optional list. And then last one is, if you want, you can spend your refresh. You can never spend your last refresh point. You will always have one.
Mm-hmm.
But you can spend up to 2 of your refresh to buy even more stunts. You can start the game with 5 stunts if you want, you know? 5 or 6. It depends on how many your mantle gives you automatically.
Right.
So that's basically it. That's character creation.
Mm-hmm.
It's only 3 aspects. Distribute a couple numbers and write down some stunts. Pick one off of a list.
Sounds pretty straightforward.
That's it.
Yeah, which is why it's fast to get into it.
It really is.
I think talking about a step after character creation versus what Dresden is part of the issue that I kind of saw as like an opening to this, and that is that the way that Dresden is written and the books are done in their novella form, they're not starting people. These are everything that's happening is happening at a much higher level than even accelerated characters will really ever get to.
Yeah.
You're never going to have a campaign to the point where you hang out with Harry and are doing the things that Harry has to deal with at the level that he deals with them and the people the individuals and afflictions happen with him, right? It doesn't mean that you won't have story, you won't have experiences within your game that don't sit within the realm, but they're literally high-level characters.
Yeah, they really are.
It's funny when you compare it to something like, hey, I've read the Forgotten Realms books.
Mm-hmm.
I'm now going to play D&D, running into Dresden kind of could be a thing. Like, that's possible.
Sure.
Within a year of playing in a campaign, it's not a big deal to run into him anymore.
Yeah, sure.
Because you're kind of close
right.
in doing what you're doing, right? Or even surpassing, in some ways, him. But the whole point of it is that this kind of sits outside of the scope, which is interesting about Dresden, because you are playing kind of at a lower level, at a lower point in the arena.
But I think that's good, though, personally. Because the thing that I adore the most about the Dresden Files is that there are cool stories to be told at every level, and what is going on? Well, we're not watching Harry rubbing elbows with Queen Mab of the Winter Court.
Right?
There's tons of stuff there.
I put it more along the lines of like watching Star Wars and being in the Star Wars universe. You're not Luke fighting the Empire directly with Leia and attacking your father, who is running it.
Yeah, exactly. We're thinking Rogue One here.
Correct.
You're a ragtag band of nobodies on the back end who just happened to stumble across some interesting things the Empire was going on and said we need to do something about this.
Right. Now we're helping, and so. Because the world and universe is so large, you are affected by those moments that are going on at the larger scape, but there's a lot of storytelling space, a lot of blank space to fill. What
I really liked actually was, and this takes place in world, though it doesn't get a lot of fanfare in the books. But the book 3 of the big Dresden books, is called the Paranet Papers.
Yes.
Okay, and what the Paranet is essentially. After things really kind of kick off with, because the Red Court starts doing some horrible crap, and they go to war with the White Council of Wizards. And a lot of lower level practitioners start getting caught up in that because they don't have the protection of the White Council under the Unseelie Accords.
Okay.
Right? They're not officially part of the White Council, even though they're magical practitioners.
Right.
And so the Red Court starts bumping them off because they know that it will provoke a reaction from the White Council. And so these lesser practitioners, these lesser supernatural forces, start realizing they kind of need to band together because they aren't part of a larger group that has the protection of the Unseelie Accords over them.
Right.
And so the Paranet is formed, which is essentially the paranormal network. And it's a great in-world excuse to get like a Red Court infected and a werewolf and a practitioner of magic and a changeling fae all together in the same group doing wacky hijinks in the Dresden verse because you have to. You have to make allies when you're not part of one of the major factions. You know?
Also, things happen around your friendships.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All the time. Like, and I think that's a key point to this. But I think what you're pointing at is something that is where my problems came in with this book. You know, I will flat out say, when I grabbed this book for the first time and started reading through it, I stopped 4 times. For various reasons.
Yeah.
It was hard to get into. And when I started looking, I went right to the DM section because I was like, oh,
like you do.
I'm going to go to the DM section and start reading it. And realized that it was not a DM. I mean, it was a DM section, but it was the blandest, most flat DM section that I had ever read. It literally felt like I had read an AI's translation of what, you know, any DM section from 2013 to 2018 compiled into one and said, spit it out into a couple paragraphs.
Yeah.
Now, it's not bad.
No. First off, we are not saying they used AI to write the book.
Not in the least. It was just. It's also the tone, but I'm going to get to that in a minute.
Because that
is not
statement
true.
Comes with some weight. We want to make it clear we do not believe they used AI to write the book.
No. In all truth, it's kind of funny how they wrote this book.
Yeah.
And how that came out and feeling. But the point of it is that the DM section didn't give me any in-world tools. Because it had assumed I had read and memorized the previous 100 pages of tomic knowledge that was in there, and inferenced everything you just said.
Yeah.
Because I don't read the books. None of that stuff means anything to me, that the red court is doing this to the white court, and that these events could occur, because, in all honesty, it's not there. This book doesn't carry that. It is just general setting with very little motivation. Yeah,
and I think this is why we saw the previous edition of this game broken up into 2 books, one of which was an entire 300-page book on world building.
Technically 3.
Technically 3.
Because a third book was basically, okay, we made a first book to teach you the rules and get you started on this. Welcome to the Player's Handbook.
Yes.
The second book is, here is the world and everything that's going on. That's great. How do I run this? All right. You've never read the Dresden Files. Here's a bunch of physical things that are going on.
Yeah.
Okay, now this is effectively like adventure hooks.
Yes.
That's what the third book is.
Yeah.
This book has none of that.
Yes. Agreed.
But because it compresses it all together so tightly, it's scary. And I said this flat out, like, I don't think I could run Dresden Files for anyone who has read Dresden Files.
Yeah, I agree.
I would ham-heartedly screw it up. You know, as badly as if I was trying to run a canonic Doctor Who game. And I know some Doctor Who stuff. There are Whovians who would eat me alive.
Oh yeah,
because I would screw something up.
You earlier in our discussions, you likened it to the hypothetical Tron game that I said I was going to run. And I'm like, wouldn't it be cool to play a game inside of a computer for 2 network engineers? But 3 network engineers.
But the thing about that is that there are things that we can accept that are no big deal. But if I start talking about certain things that are happening in the Red Court, your skin literally starts to crawl because that's not how it happened. Those events can't happen that way because that's not how it happened in canonical story. For literally 17 books, I am fighting 17 year after year. I mean, it wasn't like the 17 books passed over 400 years. Like, or even like Star Wars, where it's like, what you're seeing in these movies is 10 years. What you're seeing in these movies are these 10 years. What happened between those? 26 years. Or 100 years.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's like, okay.
Plenty of room for stuff to happen.
Whereas, like,
stories, right.
But Dresden is a human, effectively. You know, there's a lifespan there and an existence. Like, I don't know effectively chronological length of those 17 years, but somebody does.
Yeah.
Or 17 books. It's not 17 years. I'm guessing it's a little longer than that. But it's not. It can't be 200 years of Dresden.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that right there makes it even more challenging because so tight. It's no different than being like, oh, I'm going to do this in Buffy. Buffy was a very tight timeline.
Yeah, it was.
And events. Yes, you could do things in there. There are a few blank spaces, but, you really can't get around it.
And I think the important thing, and I don't think the book expressed this, maybe not terribly well. I mean, at the very beginning, it talks, instead of doing character creation, first it talks about campaign creation.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to bring that up.
So it does talk a bit about how you and the players should all talk about the type of game you want to play, and what forces and factions you want involved in that game, and where you want that game to be taking place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of encouraged to make this stuff up together as a group.
Yep.
And I think that's I don't know how well the book does of explaining that, but I think that's the sweet spot right there for me, because almost all of the canonical Dresden stuff takes place in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's a hot spot of supernatural activity because it's a crossroads, it's a nexus,
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing. But essentially, the moment you move your story out of Chicago into Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
Or New Orleans, as they use as an example in the book. Who's Harry Dresden?
Yeah.
He's
a blip in history for some of these individuals.
He's that warden from up north, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I've heard his name before from one. It's one of the White Council dudes mentioned it or something like that.
Right. So it gives you that leverage to flex the world a little bit.
Sure.
That events that happen in Arizona.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily have an impact of what's going on in Chicago.
Exactly. You're going to have different regional wardens and stuff like that from the White Council. You're going to have different vampires and different werewolves and stuff that all showing up. Some factions are going to have more presence or less presence. Again, that's all decided by you guys in your campaign,
Right.
We don't want the vampires involved here. Okay. Why are there no vampires here? White Council wiped them all out. Cool. No vampires in our campaign. All right.
Yeah.
And maybe we talk a little bit about how that happened between the White Council and the vampires.
Yeah, you set up the mountains, if you will, of what's the edgescape.
Sure,
yeah.
Exactly. But define your own playground, with that. So, if you don't want to have every single faction involved in your game, you don't have to. But again, I don't know how well the book does of expressing that you don't need to know all of the Dresden verse.
Right.
It
doesn't do a very good job of that, in my opinion. I think if you are a savvy storyteller, you can pick that up. And you can get excited, but the only reason why I'm excited about Dresden is not from the book. It's from the people who talk about it and the references that I find in the book. For me, the lore in it really wasn't exciting. It felt too compressed to be exciting. It felt that it was trying to get out as much information as it could in the shortest amount of space to be able to express what the world was like. And in that, it felt very dry and clinical.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, canonically, based upon who wrote this book in character, because they did the same thing they did in the previous ones, it needs to come out that way.
So this book is written by Ivy?
Yeah, it's written in the tone of the character Ivy, as if they were to have written it.
So Ivy is a supernatural character known as the Archive, and she is the living embodiment of all written history. Literally, if a thing has been written down, Ivy knows it, with an eidetic memory.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes from literally barroom napkins that you have scrawled a note on all the way up to manuscripts.
It's terrifying how much fanfic is stuck in her brain that's painful.
Yeah, no, exactly. in fact, there is a point at which Harry is in a really difficult situation and needs to get a hold of her, and he literally just writes it hey, Ivy, I know you can see this because I'm writing it. I need blah, 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 blah. If, send this immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And then just crumples it up and throws it away. But because it had been committed to writing, she knew it.
Mm-hmm.
and therefore got a message to her, which is really cool. But the problem is that Ivy is too smart.
Pan-intelligent.
She knows, and I will say this because it says it in text in the margins of one of the pages, knows over 1 million words of English alone.
Mm-hmm.
And she uses them all.
She is quite loquacious.
And there are points at which she's just flexing her vocabulary. And it makes the book, because it's supposed to be written in her voice, makes it very difficult to read.
Yeah.
Instead of just being a game manual where you can just be like, okay, this is this, that is that, and this is how you play, she waxes poetic about things.
Yeah.
And uses $10 words to do it. And, like, I count myself a pretty well-read person, a pretty intelligent person. Like, big words don't scare me, you know? I'm not a person who will ever get down on someone for using big words, but it does create a language barrier.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts to sound like lawyer speak at certain points.
Yes.
And that's where my eyes start rolling in the back of my head, and I start tuning out.
That's literally why I had to, one of the first reasons why I had to stop.
I love the Dresden verse. I love the Dresden verse. Hopefully you can hear that in every word I've spoken today, but man, this book was hard to read at points.
Yeah.
Luckily, when you start getting into the meat and potatoes of, like, character creation and stuff like that falls off a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, the first paragraph of the character creation, thing is, like, none of that was necessary.
Yeah. And
I don't know what the hell I just read, and that puts you off reading the rest of it.
That's why the DM tips when you finally get to it, because at that point, they've already told you how to create a game, how a session 0 effectively should go, how to do character creation, how to determine what factions are in your game, how to outline all of that. They've gone through all that, so it finally gets to a section where it's DM tips, and the DM tips are so generic to the point where you're reading through it, and it's this loquacious, poetical, like, how to be a good DM. And then there's just this box that's basically like, oh, when you get tongue-tied, try one of these 4 single-line things. And I'm like...
And they're, like, really random. You could almost put a D6 chart next to them of, like, roll a random number and then do the thing.
But it doesn't explain what it means by getting tongue-tied.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's not addressed anywhere in there. It's just a note that's kind of just jammed in there. And I found that the sticky notes go from being in-lore kibitz between her and her bodyguard in kind of a fun way to eventually just be this grindy, blocky thing that got in the way of the movement of the document itself.
Yeah, they're a little distracting. They are cute.
They're cute.
Especially if you know the characters.
Correct.
But they are distracting.
Yeah. And at times, because it's not just the sticky notes, there are circles around things that don't have reference to actually learning the game. Mm-hmm. So they're highlighting things for the comedic and people who know Dresden.
Yeah.
Not for the people who are trying to learn the game.
Yeah.
Or the important parts of the game. So, like, Mab's name is not highlighted in text.
Mm-hmm.
I had to, like, read through a few times to find the part that it was needing me to reference about something else so that I knew that there was an interesting point there.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, a commentary circled another thing on there and, drew it to a sticky note, and it's like, I don't care about that. That doesn't help me learn the game.
Right.
All of that was fan service.
Yeah, it's a wink and a nod to something that happened on page 73 of the 4th book.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay.
The other thing that got me, and I didn't have the physical book to be able to do my reference points on this one, so I'll have to come back to you on this, was I had the digital version. Mm-hmm. And the digital PDF was great about, like, even in the quick character sheets of, like, go to this page, because it would just give you the name of, like, the stunt, and then a page number. Yeah. You could click and go to the page number. That's really great, but you can't go back to the page you were on.
Yep.
So backlinking was absolutely horrendous, because you'd get 3 links in and be like, what was I originally going to this page for?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why am I here now? So all of that feels cumbersome at some point.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything that I could see out of this book that basically gave me anything new to talk about as far as like good role-playing techniques or something unique that it kind of put out as a perspective. In fact, I feel like it did a poor job of stealing ideas from other systems that were existing at the time. Or that some systems have done a much better job of addressing in a more direct way.
Yeah.
Like the faction systems that are in Forged in the Dark is 100 times better and would apply here in spades, like amazingly well. They just say factions are important. You know, maybe link some of your, because your players are going to be involved in those factions, link them into the story. Okay, well, your players are defining the story elements.
Yeah.
Okay, what am I doing then to address that?
Yeah, there isn't a whole lot of guidance on top of that.
No, and it's not.
The thing that I found greatly distracting, actually, about the world building section, which is, like you said, the first 80, 90 pages of the book, is that I'd have much rather preferred that they separate the overall world building from the who's who and character sheets of the major players.
Yes.
Because I found that it greatly distracted from trying to learn the broad concepts that they're trying to introduce to you of, like, okay, fairies are a thing in this world. There is the summer court and the winter court. Okay, cool. I can cope with that. There are two factions of fairies, summer and winter. Awesome.
Right.
Okay, here's Titania's character sheet. Cool. Who's Titania? Oh, she's the summer queen. I'm assuming queen is important. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Here's your character sheet.
Yeah.
I don't need this yet.
Right, I don't even
need
understand it.
I don't need to know who Titania is. I barely need to know who the summer queen is.
Right.
Let alone who Titania is, let alone her character sheet. And I felt like it really broke up the flow. Like, they should have started with broad concepts and been like, look, there's a lot going on in this world. There's fairies, there's vampires, there's werewolves, there's other, things going on here. Here's some of the minor players. There's the Denarians and the Knights of the Cross. Here's how they interact and whatnot. You can find more about these factions in the back of the book. And then being like, okay, now if you want to know more about the Summer Court, here's the Summer Queen, here's the Summer Lady, here's the Summer Knight. Here's the Winter Queen, here's the Winter Lady, here's the Winter Knight. Here's how they got there, etc., etc., etc. And that would have been a lot better. I think you'd have found that a lot easier to read. I found it difficult to read, and I knew what was going on.
Right. And the other thing for me is that for something that is the lexicon of knowledge, the amount of the lack of pronunciation and understanding at times. Yeah. Like, Latin terms were often translated if it was direct Latin. But other times that Latin terms were used, they'd just use the Latin term and not explain what it was. Even though that, if you translated it, which I did, was like, oh, it means shadow fighters.
Shadow hunter, yeah.
Shadow hunters.
Ventorium, Umbrium, or something like that, yeah.
Why not just tell me that that's what that means? So you've already told me other times what Latin means. Yeah. This is kind of a very important time to know... understand that, to be able to break it down, especially if this isn't my first language.
Yeah, exactly.
So, there's a lot of privilege in this book that it's assumed.
Yeah, agreed.
And I think privilege on the part of the education of the reader. I think privilege on the part of your access to Dresden information and understanding the Dresden world a little bit. And also from the breadth of who you are as a role player.
Yeah.
Because it makes a lot of assumptions on creating a world with your players who may never have done that before.
Yeah, because that whole section there really only gets a couple paragraphs of like, oh yeah, just make a world. Just sit down and decide what you want, the scope of your world to be, what factions you want to be there. Have that discussion with them. Now make characters.
So one of the things that I just dawned on me while I was sitting here, because I was going to talk about it a little bit, was the adventure, the NOLA adventure, the sample campaign, right?
Oh, yeah.
That was in the back. Yeah, we'll always have Parish, right? The
yes.
example campaign. Nowhere in this do they use the outline for creating it in here.
They don't show their work at all.
They don't show their work at all. They have characters and they have the definitions, but they had a worksheet that they showed you how to walk through, effectively creating defining everything, your factions and everything, and linking it. All they had to do was to use that to show it off.
And honestly, I'll say this. I think that's a symptom of just moving to this accelerated format where they wanted to compress everything into one neat, tidy little book. Certain things had to go by the wayside, because if I remember correctly, the big Dresden books from last edition had that. They showed step by step how to go through and make a city, give the city aspects that could be that were citywide, that could be compelled.
Yeah, and they even talk about, like, throw a few aspects in, ask players for the aspects within the scene.
Yeah.
And you're like, what do they know? Give me an example of an aspect. And again, there are no scenes in here to describe what those aspects would be either. So accelerated is the word of the day on this book.
Yeah.
You have to know what you're doing to step into this.
Yeah, it's definitely, you're going to have to kind of do your homework.
Yeah.
Not only from the Dresden standpoint, but from the Fate standpoint as well, I think, to fully employ this book the way that it was meant to be. I think the bones of it are all there, and like I said, I love the Dresden verse. I think it is a phenomenally built world, and I am excited to play there. I would love to play there sometime. Part of me wants to run this for you guys, because I do love the Dresden verse, and I know that, several other people in our friends group who also love Dresden and whatnot, but yeah, I kind of agree that the book doesn't necessarily do a great job of setting you up for success with it. So, tell you what, we have spent a lot of time kvetching about this book. Let's say some nice things about it, and then let's get to some questions.
That's fair.
What do we like about this? What do we think Dresden is doing well here?
Okay, so from a point of good, I will say that I feel that it got through the rule set, and really explored and exposed a very quick character creator and a good general design for getting into a game.
Yes.
Working with your players, understanding what factions, opening up the board the board space between you and your players to be able to design a good game that might be short, just a short campaign of like maybe 4 or 5 game sessions, without it feeling cumbersome. Yes. I think that was great. You get a taste of Dresden with this, but it's not heavy-handed. It's like, here's the world that Dresden's in. Use some of these assets. Have fun. Yeah. Here's your taste.
I also really like the Fate Accelerated rules. I always found Fate a little scary. It's a little esoteric for me. I need some numbers to hold on to. Not a lot, but I need some. It's one of the reasons why I think Powered by the Apocalypse kind of puts me off a little bit as well. But I think this step, taking what I know of Fate and dragging it one step back towards at least Powered by the Apocalypse. I think mantles and approaches are very good, very clean concepts I can easily grab onto and easily employ without a lot of crunch, but offers you a lot of variety. And I think that's where it excels.
Yep.
And again, like I said, I love the Dresden verse, and I love that the mantles in there, they kept it open like they did in the previous version, where you could play just about anything. And there's some guidelines in there for making your own stuff as well.
Yeah, no, creating a mantle is 100% in here.
So you're making your own mantles, making your own stunts and stuff like that. It's not like a nothing in Fate really has a lot of numbers attached to it. It's very esoteric, but there are at least guidelines for, like, your stunt should probably fall into doing one of these things, essentially, with these by these guidelines. If you're going to create your own stuff.
Yep.
And lastly, the thing that I really liked was that in several places the book shows you the math. when it's talking about how to divvy up your approaches, it straight up tells you, like, if you want to create a strong character,
spend your points this way.
Spend your points, yeah, like brute, all-star, trickster, guardian, thief, and swashbuckler.
Yeah.
No, again, these aren't like character classes. These are just literally words they're using to describe point spreads. But it's like, if you want to be a brute, put your +3 in force, focus and flair get your +2s, guile and haste get your +1, and intellect get your +0.
Yeah.
Because intellect's your dump stat is brute.
Yeah. Which makes sense because, again, it's not saying that you can't do things with your other stats. I'm sorry, if I'm trying to repair something and I'm using a hammer to basically bang it back to life, that's not a very intelligent thing to do, but it may work.
Yeah, sure, exactly. That's a force thing. Or it might be a finesse thing.
Correct.
If you're banging it carefully,
Yeah.
The other way that they show the numbers, though, and this is something that I'm sure Sean would just absolutely love, is when they're talking about how the rules work. Okay, so anytime you want to make a roll, you take 4 fate dice, which they have 2 pluses, 2 minuses, and 2 blank spaces on them. You can use normal d6s and just use high, medium, low. Your 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 6 for them as well, but you always roll 4 of them, and then those modify your number. So if you're rolling with your +3 stat, you can get all the way from -1 if you roll all minuses, -4, or you can get all the way up to +7 if you roll all pluses. At a certain point, you can do something where you can invoke an aspect and either get a +2 to your roll, or you can re-roll the dice altogether.
Right.
It straight up tells you this option is only statistically better than the +2 bonus if the roll is -3 or -4, and then shows you the odds of getting any outcome on those dice on the reroll.
Yep.
And it's 81.48% if you've got a -4 that you're going to get something better. 61.73% chance that you're going to get a better roll if you re-roll if you had a -3. And then it goes down from there. Like, the fact that it is that transparent, instead of just being like, oh, well, player agency, you should choose. No. You should be informed about the choice you're making. Not all of us can cram that much math in our heads.
Yep.
Especially me. It's very nice to be explicitly told the good situation to use that rule in.
Well, and the other thing is that the dice rolls are so different than any other game you've played. It's hard to think about the math because it's, unless you're a mathematician, knowing that those dice are still dice and that really your calculations are not valued plus, in the same way, it's hard to factor those things on the fly.
Yeah.
So
never tell me the odds.
Yeah. In this case, please tell me the odds.
Please tell me the odds. Oh, God. I would never be able to figure that out on my own.
So, from your opinion, what doesn't it do well?
I mean, I don't think it does a good job of conveying information as a book very well. I would, if I could re-edit this book, I would go and I would put it in a much different order, and I would tone down. I don't know necessarily that I would change it, that it's not Ivy telling the story, but I don't think I would be so flippant with her just expressing her character on the pages in lieu of giving me a good, understandable book.
I tend to agree with you on that, and the thing that I came to in my frame was she has all of the knowledge that was ever written anywhere about anything. Why isn't she doing more references then instead of self-creation?
Yeah.
I would have loved to see the Red Court describes themselves as, and have a description that was written by someone else. In the 13th century, the church opened itself with this statement. Or, it could have been found in, in this thing, and have the notations on the side, of like, this was never written in English. Wasn't that Latin? Yeah, but who remembers all of this in Latin? And I'm not writing it twice.
Right.
Yes. Those kinds of things would make sense and would have been funny and fitting. Like, I love the original 7th Sea Player Handbook for the way it described the world. The pages were beautiful. They did giant art. and then 3 paragraphs about each country. And you had everything you needed to know. And then it would say, okay, now I'm going to give you a whole page on that country that's going to go into not only all the general aspects of it and its magic and what's unique about it, but also how the people feel about other countries.
Yeah, yeah.
And it did that in like 8 pages,
Vampire
8 or
the
9
Masquerade
pages.
did quite a bit of that too.
It very much
where it was
did.
like, okay, here's this clan objectively, without any any flair or bias or anything like that, and here's how members of this clan typically feel about members of the other clans.
Yeah.
And some of them were like, hey, we'll love it when they show up at parties, and other ones were like, avoid, avoid, avoid.
Right. And when you're touching upon powers like the Fae, like the She, like the Seelie and Unseelie, like terms like that, where they're very broad terms that people are going to recognize outside of the Dresden verse. And what was interesting to me was Unseelie isn't described, really, but it's there.
Yeah.
Other terms, which don't need description, are gone into detail. So its weight about the universe is constantly thrown.
To be entirely fair, they don't use the word unseelie outside of the specific term unseelie accords terribly often in the stories. It's always summer and winter.
Right. And that's the thing for me is, and again, it's a lexicon thing of fairies, fae, Seelie, courts. And it's like, okay, there's a lot of terms to describe a race of individuals.
Yep.
But never how they understand themselves. Like, we don't go around saying hominids instead of human.
Oh, maybe you don't.
Right?
Such a hominid thing to say.
Exactly. But this book does that in gross. But it also doesn't break down the vampires in 3 different vampire names.
It's true.
Like, it doesn't immediately say to the Red Court is sanguinists or whatever, right? Or sanguinists.
Yeah.
As it said. But that would make sense based upon the other text that's around it. So that's one of my problems with this book, is that it throws itself around in weird ways as you're reading it, and it doesn't feel like it presents itself in a uniform way. And again, like you said, with the character sheets thrown, or the NPC sheets thrown right in the middle of the lore, is just so jarring. Like, they're bigger than the art. They become a full page of the art. And I'm so glad, I will say this, that I had the PDF version and not the book to go through.
Yeah.
The text is a wall on every page.
Yep.
There is barely a moment to breathe reading through this. And because it is wall text, black on white, with very little redefinition to help to figure out specific points.
Yeah, your dyslexia must have been just running you rampant.
Oh my god, it was painful at times.
That...
Especially when words are, loquacious, like I said.
Oh, yeah.
And they'll use... So there's a section in the parish write-up at the end where one of the players basically is given something. Now, granted, in the next paragraph, they don't directly describe it, but it's inferred that it's a sword, because the only line that's described, like, he says, and he's presented with this thing. It's a name. It's like Asmond or something like that. It's a specific named blade.
Asparachius?
Yes. But the thing is that it doesn't say that isn't, like, I don't know, an orb or a backpack or a person. It isn't until 3 lines later that it's like he never unsheathed the named thing, Asparachius. And I'm like, oh, it's a sword. You never said it was a sword. You never referenced that as a thing. And I'm like, okay. Because I went back looking, like, Asparachius never is described anywhere else. And it threw me off. But that is fluent through the book, where they'll use a term and then not have a description for it or a reference for it. It's inferred later what it means.
Oh, Amarachus.
Or Amarachus.
Yeah, okay. It was, Michael Carpenter's sword, Amarachus. Yeah. Yep.
But you know what it is.
I know exactly what it is.
But I have no clue. And that's in the example.
It's the Sword of Love.
Again, not referenced.
Yep, never referenced. Understood. Yep.
And that's in the referenced this is a campaign, a story you could run.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what that was. But now in the game, you're going to be like, any of the players would look at me and go, oh yeah, that's the Sword of Love. Oh, so I probably shouldn't have used it this way. Yeah, that felt really weird that you used it that way.
Yeah, if it's ever used in that way, it actually literally disintegrates itself and jumps to a new user.
And now I'm terrified.
You're like, oh, cool. Okay. That's entirely the concept my entire campaign is built around, but awesome.
Yeah. It's the same thing as like accidentally using explaining that a certain Jedi is using this colored lightsaber.
Mm-hmm.
That means this. But, like, nobody says it because they assume you know what you're doing. And then later on
you're like, I just thought purple was a nice color. Like, but apparently it says something about you. It's like flower language all over again, you know?
You know, and that's a little of the weight that I felt out of this, is that I could never feel comfortable running this. It's too specific of a world with not enough definition to tell me that I have space to work within it.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary.
Yeah,
it is scary. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for anybody who doesn't know Dresden.
Yeah,
I really wouldn't.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
Yeah, good mechanics. Fate Accelerated. Enjoy yourself.
Love it.
Enjoy yourself. Good application of them. Application of them.
Let's get to some questions here.
Nevin's got a great number of questions. I'm glad some of these got thrown at us.
All right. How does the system tackle the detective part?
There is literally 2 paragraphs talking about investigation in the whole book.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Okay.
It's terrible at it. It's absolutely terrible at it.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, though, is that Fate is a very open system. Okay?
Sure.
And so I will say it doesn't have any special rules specifically for investigations, which is maybe a little odd when you consider that this is a book about a wizard detective.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not playing a wizard detective, and you're not bound to playing a detective, so it's not necessarily a game about investigations. It's just a game told in a world that also features an investigator.
Correct.
Okay. So I'm not faulting the game in any way by not having highly evolved investigation mechanics. It doesn't have highly evolved mechanics for anything, really.
No.
There's a section on ritual magic, because that is an important thing in this world. And it's probably the most complex part of the in-world mechanics, period. Thaumaturgy gets really weird in the books, but it follows some very strict rules.
Mm-hmm.
Which is good because it gamifies well.
Yes.
But like I said, Fate is a very open system.
Yeah.
It's designed to kind of handle everything, just because what approach are you using? Do you want to punch the person? Cool, that sounds like a force roll.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Get right into it.
Just roll force, and we'll figure it out from there. You know?
Mm-hmm.
And even the way that it goes about doing things like combat, like putting someone in a chokehold isn't an attack. That's create an advantage.
Mm-hmm.
You're putting an aspect on that character in a chokehold. That's the name of the aspect, in a chokehold. And someone can compel that aspect of, I'm going to punch them in the stomach now. And they're also in a chokehold, which means they're going to be easy to hit.
Mm-hmm.
I compel that aspect on them.
Yes.
Boom. Okay, so now I'm +2 to punch them in the stomach.
So the power of chokehold compels you?
Literally.
Yep, see how that works out?
Literally.
Yep.
So, because of how Fate handles literally everything, it doesn't have a great set of rules for handling the detective part, but it doesn't have a great set of rules for handling anything other than the core rules of handling everything.
Yeah, but there's nothing in system mechanics for the DM to handle investigations in a nice way, nor do they describe how to do investigations in any way. They really just gloss over it at best. It's not bad, because they expect it to be there, but it is very quick how they describe it.
Sure.
So.
Sure. Do you need to have read some of the books to play the game? Technically, no.
To play the game. Play the game.
To play the game.
No, definitely not. You could play the game and just learn as you go. to run the game,
I'd strongly suggest it. And they're good books, but I'd strongly suggest it because this book does you no favors in teaching you the complexities of the world.
Yep. You already answered this one. What elements of the system are specific to the universe of Dresden Files? I think the biggest one is the magic system.
The mantles and the magic system.
Yeah, I think that's
especially the ritual magic system is great.
Yeah.
And what are the pros and cons of Dresden Files compared to other games like Urban Shadows? Dresden has for itself a very specific niche, and because there are 17 books in the series so far, there's a lot of reference material for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very popular series, so there's a lot of fandom out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy to find reference images
Yeah.
and all that jazz. So if you want to jump into a very well-supported world with lots of lore, lots of ancillary stories and whatnot, there's even collections of short stories.
The wiki is impressive.
Called briefcases. Get them?
Oh,
Briefcases.
gee, that's it, I'm out.
Every title is a double entendre. I need to prepare you for that. Every book title is a double entendre.
I'm done. I'm so done.
As opposed to like Urban Shadows, which is very generic. It's meant to be, because it's there to create your own world about it.
Yeah,
you know, but you're not going to get the depth of world building that Dresden comes prepackaged with.
Yeah, I would totally agree with all those statements, without a doubt.
The cons, however, is that it comes prepackaged with a lot of world building. So if you're looking to write your own stories, sometimes you can, like you said, run into those problems where it's like, oh, that's not actually how this happened in the books. In book 17, you see here Dresden. Yeah.
Right, and because he's working at a level that he is, it's hard. It's much easier to run into those. The books are at that level, so that everyone who has read the books is aware of the machinations at the highest level of each one of these factions.
Mm-hmm.
So if those factions as a whole are involved, you have to be careful. No different than like in Star Wars to be like, oh, I'm going to run a Mandalorian campaign. Okay, what years are we dealing with? At what point in the story? Can you at least let me know what movie series that we're involved in?
Yeah.
Because it matters.
Yeah.
Because we have so much canonical information wrapped around specifically the Mandalorians.
And if I, as the storyteller, just thought they had neat armor and blasters,
yeah,
and walked into this going, what do you mean, what movie are we in?
Yeah.
They're just the cool guys with armor and blasters?
Yeah.
You're going to be like, oh boy, this is going to be a long campaign.
But there's a lot of information to go out there and dig around and find out about it, practically reading the books.
I could find out about it easily, yeah.
Yeah, so... And then, as a first TTRPG to master, how easy is it?
Don't go to Fate for your first... No, don't. I have been storytelling for 30 years, and I am still a little bit scared of Fate.
So Fate is a generic system.
Yeah.
It is not a bad system.
Oh, I'm not
but
saying
it
it's a bad
demands
system.
a lot of its storyteller.
That's what I'm saying.
And because it demands a lot of its storyteller without gifting you much in how to do things beyond the mechanics, it's like, hey, here's a full commercial kitchen. We will tell you how to use each one of the machines in it. Make a meal. And you're like, okay, where do I start? Well, are you making breakfast or dinner? I don't know. You said make a meal. Oh, you'll figure it out.
Not actually my problem with it.
Okay.
Because I could do that. I could walk into a kitchen and make a meal. Okay, I'd be like, okay, fine. I know several recipes. Do we have this, this, and this on hand? Sure. I guess we're eating dinner now, but it's 5 a.m. We're eating dinner, bitches.
Fair enough.
You didn't tell me to make breakfast.
Right.
You told me to make a meal.
Right.
We're making okonomiyaki. Okay?
It's fine.
You got cabbage. You got bacon.
This is
you got
happening.
eggs. We're making okonomiyaki.
Okay.
All right. What I've got, the problem I see is that it lacks structure. It lacks numerical structure. Okay? Say what you want about D&D, and long-term fans of the podcast know that I will and have. But one thing it does give you is hard, concrete numbers and concepts to look at.
Yes.
Okay?
It is a board game.
Very easy to see the advantage of this over that because this one's +1 and that one's +2.
Yes.
And higher number is better. because your target number is the thing you're trying to get over. Okay, cool. What's an aspect?
Yep.
What's a good aspect? How do I compel an aspect in a good, advantageous way? Well, I don't know. What aspect is it? I don't know, because I can't wrap my head around what an aspect is. You know, I'm not saying these things are not understandable,
right?
But they are not concrete concepts. Okay, so to go back to your metaphor, it's not like a kitchen and being told to make a meal, because I could do that, because a meal is a concrete thing. There are rules for how to do that. They're loose rules, but there are rules. It's like handing me a canvas and saying, paint a masterpiece. Of what? Just, follow your heart.
Go with it.
Just go with it.
Yeah.
Do I have paints? Do I have charcoals? Do I have pastels? What am I working with here? You'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
You don't even give me that much to go on. I've
right.
got a blank canvas and I need to come up with a masterpiece for this.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
That's fair. That's fair.
So that's my
feeling on Fate.
Feeling on Fate, not problem.
I
Problem's
think
not a right word. Yeah.
This does a good job with Accelerated of painting a direction for Fate.
Yes.
And in many ways, if you played Urban Shadows and then one of your players was a Dresden fan and said, "Hey guys, I got this Fate Accelerated version that's Dresden. You guys want to play?" I dare say you could do just fine in that.
I think it's Powered by the Apocalypse adjacent enough. It would be very easy to move from Urban Shadows to Dresden.
In fact, I would dare say, and this is just an edge, that if what your players were playing Urban Shadows and said, "I need something more crunchy," there you go.
There you go.
File the serial numbers off of Dresden Accelerated and play Urban Shadows.
Oh wow, yeah.
I mean, you could.
Defining either of those games as crunchy is just wild,
but it is.
But it is.
It is. So, speaking of existing
games set in existing IPs, guess what we're talking about next week, guys?
Yeah, we're gonna go into a little more depth about the problems that we kind of very quickly discussed in this one, of playing in an existing movie or book or video game IP that's already out there, and the problems and the benefits that come that you can do with it. We've both talked about wanting to play in certain IPs.
Sure.
And the problems therein. I mean, today we even brought up a few of them. But we're really going to break down our pros and cons as we've seen it and the stuff that we've discovered along the way by going through games like this. So I think that there is a varied and wide decision to be made there. And I dare say, even in the last year, I've learned more about the comfort levels based upon the IP and really what makes that difference. So hopefully we'll have some fun with that discussion. So.
All right. Well, you can find us on Twitter at @ST_Conclave, on Instagram at ST_Conclave. Listen to us live every Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time on mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave. And join us on our Discord. We'd love it if you shot us some questions, join the discussion with the other great storytellers there, bounce some campaign ideas off of them and such like that. You can find that link on our Twitter as well as our website, storytellerconclave.com.
We'd like to thank our Patreon members who give us support every single month and help us out, especially our name members, Knox in the Box, Sam, the Arcane Asylum, Sedget, Sparkle Motion Veteran, and Hulavu. We truly appreciate all your support. Our pre-show music is by Arcane Anthems. You can find them at patreon.com/Arcane Anthems or on Instagram at Arcane Anthems. Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Geefrog. You can find them at geefrog.bandcamp.com or on YouTube Music. And our outro music, which you're hearing right now, is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find them at freemusicarchive.org.
And a big shout out, as always, to our families, Vicky and Sean. Thank you so much for loving and supporting us. All of our families who've sat with us at our tables over these years who give you these great stories to share with you. Jim Butcher for writing the Dresden verse. And you, every single one of our listeners. We love you guys so much.
Good night.